I'm Josiah Fuller. I am the family minister here at Southport Heights Christian Church. And I'm not really sure that Steve knew what he was doing when he asked me to cover for him. So he asks me to cover for him in the middle of a series on prayer. And I got to be honest with you. I'm going to make a confession here. I don't really rank myself very high in the prayer charts. I don't feel like a superb prayer, a great model of prayer. But here I am preaching to you about prayer. When I think of prayer, I think of these great people. We have an awesome prayer team here, and I've sat in on some of their sessions, and it's just moving. It's just so impressive to hear them talking to God, talking to each other, and pouring out their concerns for our relationship with our Father and our relationship with the world around us. It's just, wow. When I listen to them and when I'm a part of that, it's like, I wish I could do that. But I feel like I fall short. And then on top of it, he gives me this topic of the importance of prayer in sharing your faith. Now, those of you who know me know that even though I'm in ministry, I'm a pretty quiet person. And so when I think of sharing your faith and going out and talking to people about Jesus, I think it's a really important thing, and I'm very impressed with people who do it well. But usually when I do it, it's kind of this awkward thing that makes people uncomfortable because I don't always know what to say. And I kind of force myself into the situation, and it's like, let's make everybody uncomfortable. So either I am the worst person in the world to be bringing this message to you today, or maybe I'm the best person, because if I can figure this out, then maybe anybody can. So I think one of my hang-ups with prayer and with sharing your faith and these spiritual things are my expectations versus my reality. I was born a preacher's kid. I grew up in the church. I was doing church stuff all my life. I have had a preacher as a father, have a preacher and a Bible college professor as a grandfather. All of my uncles were preachers. All of my cousins and my brother went into ministry. And so it was just kind of one of those things that I knew, even though I didn't know what I was going to do with my life growing up, I knew I'd probably do something with ministry, with the church. But on top of that, being a preacher's kid, I do a lot of things with the church, but I'm not just doing things with the church. I'm hanging out with my dad, the preacher, who's hanging out with other preachers, and he's hanging out with elders, and he's hanging out with missionaries, and all of these really spiritually mature people. And so growing up, I get this idea in my head of what spiritual maturity is supposed to look like. You hear about these people that get on an airplane and for a 2-hour flight, and they sit down next to a person, start talking to them, and then by the end of the flight, that person's ready to give their life to Jesus. It's like, wow, that's really impressive. Back then, I thought I could never do that, but maybe as I get older and I develop more spiritually and I mature more spiritually, maybe that'll be me someday. And I would hear about people that would, get up hours before everyone else and dedicate the first several hours of their day to prayer and have this huge, encyclopedia of prayer requests that they go over. And I would think, wow, that's really impressive. I am not motivated to do that. But as I grow and as I mature, I'm going to be more motivated to do that. Well, here I am. I'm 38, and I'm not there yet. My prayer life is my sharing of my faith is But I have this idea in my head that that's what I'm supposed to do. So I end up making this list of spiritually mature things. You're supposed to do these things as if you're a spiritually mature person, right? And you can't just do these things, but you have to do these things in a certain way. You got to pray a certain way for a certain amount of time. You got to use certain words. When I was in high school, I used to go to a prayer club. And to be honest, I went just because friends were going and I wanted to hang out with people. But I would sit around these other teenagers, and they would be like saying all of these words and phrases. It's like, where do you come up with this stuff? Oh, God, you are the great physician. Oh, I ask for a hedge of protection around these people. It's like, I was just talking to you earlier and you weren't talking like that. But man, when you know how to flip that spiritual switch, you know how to flip that spiritual switch. And they were just so impressive and like, well, I guess they're just more spiritually mature than I am. I guess I'll get there someday. So I went off to Bible college. I've been in ministry for a long time. And here I am. And I'm still feel like I'm not there yet. And so I get this idea that there's this list of things that we're supposed to do. And sometimes when I look at this list of things I'm supposed to do, like sharing my faith, being in youth ministry, I've got to talk to teenagers and children, and middle schoolers, high schoolers. I need to tell these people about Jesus. I need to get them baptized, right? That's my job. So we'll be hanging out, having a good time, playing games, playing video games, doing whatever, just chilling. And then it's time to have that talk. So I take that guy. I had a young man in one of our churches named Xavier, and it's like, well, he's in middle school now. He needs to be making a decision. So I set him aside, and I sit down with him, and it's, hey, let me share the gospel with you. Let me tell you how important Jesus is. And then you need to make a decision if you're going to become a Christian. And then we have the conversation, and he's like, okay, I'm going to think about it. And then we go off to back to being normal, because we got that awkward part out of the way, right? We did the thing that we had to do. I did the part that I had to do as a youth minister. I did my job, so now we can go back to having fun together. And so I get these things that I have to do in this certain way, and I either do it, and it's really, really, really awkward and weirds everybody out because I'm like forcing spirituality into a situation. Or there are other times where it's like, I should probably tell that person about Jesus, but I don't want to be awkward. So I end up just kind of dropping the ball and not doing it. And so at times I will be really weird and awkward. At other times I will just kind of fail and just feel bad about not doing what I think that I'm supposed to be doing. And then there's other times that, I do exactly what I think I'm supposed to be doing, and that's when I start feeling good about myself. And that's when I start looking at everybody else and saying, well, if I can do it, why can't you do it? And so I start getting a little judgy, right? And so I get stuck in this spectrum of I'm either being really awkward, or I'm being really arrogant, or I'm just dropping the ball completely. Maybe the awkward should be in the middle, I don't know. And it's all because I have this idea of how I'm supposed to look, how I'm supposed to talk, what I'm supposed to sound like, what people are supposed to see in me, because that's what being spiritually mature is, right? And prayer and sharing your faith are very much on that list. You got to do those things right if you want to call yourself a good Christian. And so I get stuck in this. Most of the time, I'll confess that I probably just drop the ball and just don't do much of what I think that I'm supposed to do. But then when I get weird, then I push people away, or I push people away in a different way because I start getting judgy. And so I wonder, as I'm thinking about my development as a Christian, as a child of God, I wonder if I'm not the only one who gets stuck in this, gets stuck with these ideas that you got to do these certain things, you got to dress a certain way, you got to look a certain way, you got to talk a certain way, you got to act a certain way. And I wonder if some of you out here can relate with me, and maybe some of you online can relate with me. Hey, guys. That you just kind of get in this cycle of trying to be spiritual, trying to be a good Christian, trying to spiritually mature, so you have to do these things, and you have to do them in this way, and you end up, either you're really good at it, and you end up looking down on everybody else and feeling really good about yourself, or you don't feel like you're very good at it, and so you end up feeling like a failure, feeling like everyone else is judging you, or you're in that weird space in between. Well, I'm not very good, but I'm going to do it anyway, so I feel good, but everybody else around me feels really weird. And I just wonder if maybe you all can relate with me on that. And so I've been wrestling with this. I mean, again, I'm 38 years old. I've been in the ministry. I went to Bible college and have been in the ministry since then. And so I've been kind of wrestling back and forth with this. And sometimes I think I fall into a good spot, but a lot of times I get wrapped up in, even today, preaching in front of you, it's like, well, Derek just preached a couple weeks ago. Are they going to be comparing me to Derek? Well, Steve's a great preacher. Are they going to be comparing me to Steve? Well, I've seen these other preachers. I know these other people. I start comparing myself. And I start thinking, I got to sound a certain way. I got to say certain things. I got to go deep into the Bible. I got to make sure that I do everything as a preacher the right way. I mean, Ron's over there judging me right now. And he's going to give me some notes afterwards. So I get wrapped up in this, and I'm up here because I have to be up here. Or I'm up here because I want to show off how good I am. Or I'm... Not today. That's not happening today. Or every once in a while I can fall into that sweet spot of I feel like I'm standing up here for the right reason, doing it for the right reason. I think that's where I am today. But I still, even as long as I've been a Christian, as long as I've been in ministry, I still fall into these traps of what am I supposed to look like? What am I supposed to sound like? Am I measuring up? Am I meeting this criteria that I don't want to, I had a great upbringing. I don't blame my parents or my environment for making this spiritual list that I have. That was on me. I decided that this is what I was supposed to look like. And now I'm judging myself based on that list. And so I definitely don't want you to walk away from this thinking that being good at praying is a bad thing. I am so impressed with our prayer team. Or I definitely don't want you to walk away from this thinking that talking to people about Jesus and being good at that is a bad thing. I'm so impressed with people that comes naturally to. But for the rest of us, sometimes it can be an awkward thing. Sometimes it can be a weird thing. Sometimes it can be a thing that we just put on the shelf and we never do. And so I want to help us, those of us that kind of put it on the shelf or make it really weird, I want to help us get past that. And so when it comes to prayer and sharing your faith, I believe we can change our perspective and see these in a different way. And that just looking at them from a different perspective will allow us to approach them in a much more natural way, something that fits right for who you are and still accomplishing what you should be accomplishing as a Christian, growing spiritually. And so when it comes to sharing your faith, when it comes to prayer in sharing your faith, don't worry about being spiritual. That's going to be the main message today. Don't worry about being spiritual. Just be relational. So I believe that Paul and the other writers of the New Testament, as they are guiding the church in their writings, and that's our guidebook to how we are supposed to be following Jesus, I believe that they have a very relational bent on their message to the church. But I think that I have, and maybe you have too, fallen into a trap of seeing Scripture, seeing the words of the New Testament, the message of the New Testament, from such a spiritual or trying to be spiritual perspective that you end up missing the coating of relationship that is all over it. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at a passage. It's in the book of Colossians, the letter to the Colossians. Paul wrote it. And we're going to look at it, and he's talking about prayer, and he's talking about sharing your faith. So this is a good one for us to look at. And we're going to read through it once, and then I want to read through it again, kind of what I sometimes fall into the trap of doing, of looking at it from the perspective of trying to be spiritual. And then we're going to look at it a third time in terms of being relational and having a relational perspective. So Paul is writing to the church in Colossae. He did not start this church. Paul started a lot of churches. His job as an apostle was to kind of help the church get out of Jerusalem and get past just being a Jewish church, but actually involving everyone. And so he traveled a lot, started a lot of churches, supported a lot of people, discipled a lot of people. And of course that ends him up in jail, because if you're doing things right, usually somebody has a problem with that, especially if you're bold about it. So Paul is in jail, and he writes this letter to the church of Colossae, not a church that he started, but a church that he wanted to encourage. And the whole message of Colossians, as this is going to be towards the end of the book, the whole message is basically, don't get distracted by a lot of other spiritual practices. Don't worry about other rituals and things. You have Jesus, and that's all you need. So just focus on your relationship with Jesus. That's kind of the gist of the book. And so right before he gets to his final farewells and greetings to individuals, he writes this, starting in verse 2 and going down through verse 6 in Colossians 4. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And pray for us, too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly, as I should. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So that's a nice little farewell, further instruction that he gives us. But I want to look at this from the perspective of someone who sometimes when I read the Bible, I'm really wanting to be more spiritual. And so sometimes this might be what I take out of this passage. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. Well, I've got to clear my schedule. I got to cancel all of my appointments. I don't have time for anyone else because right now is my God time. I'm going to talk to God, and nobody's going to interrupt me. It's going to be me and him, and we're going to be super spiritual together, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to be watchful and thankful, and it's going to be wonderful. And pray for us, too, that God may open a door for our message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Well, we got to pray that Paul can bring a bunch of people to church. We got to get the people in the church building so that our church can have a bigger, better congregation. We can grow a lot. We can look how big we are and how much we're maturing, and we're doing our job because we're getting people in church. Be wise in the way that you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Let me let you know just how wise I am and how well I know the Bible. I'm going to tell you all sorts of things about the Bible that you need to know so that you can know how wise I am and so that you can become a Christian, because that's my focus. And I'm going to get answers for everyone. Any problems you have, you can come to me. I'm going to answer all the problems, and I'll have a little grace in there too. So that's kind of an exaggeration, but sometimes I fall into this trap of thinking, I got to be more spiritual. And spiritual means me and God. Spiritual means numbers, growing your church. Spiritual means showing everybody how smart you are and how much of the Bible you know. It's these things that can be important, but sometimes if you lose sight of what's really important, they miss the point. So now I want to look at this. And again, I would say that you could look at through the entire New Testament and put a relational perspective on it, and it will just speak to you in such an amazing way. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. Talk to God. Be in relationship with God. Talk to Him. Be watchful for what God is doing in your life. Be thankful for what He has done in your life. But God is your dad. Have a relationship with Him. Spend some time with Him. And pray for us, too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be in relationship with each other. Pray for other Christians. Pray that they can do what they are supposed to do. Encourage them through prayer. And pray that we may bring other people into relationship with God. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So we want to be in relationship with God, we want to be in relationship with each other, and we want to be in relationship with everyone else. We want to be the type of person that we can have a conversation with anyone and welcome them in and help them out and support them and encourage them. As a father of 4, I've now been a dad for 12 years. It has kind of helped my perspective of my relationship with God. I was able to look at my earthly father and look at my relationship with God and compare it to that, and that was helpful to me. But now that I am a dad myself, I can look at my relationship with my children and kind of get a sense of maybe what God is thinking when He or how he's feeling when he's dealing with us. So I have got my kids, and I know my kids. I know that there are times when, they love me so much and they just want to spend time with me. They're so excited that I came home from work. They're happy to see me. They want to play games with me. Oh, that feels so wonderful. And then there's other times that they couldn't care less if I was in the room or not. They've got a lot of other things going on. They've got friends to play with. They've got video games to play. Whatever, Dad's there. Okay, fine. I get it. I understand that there are times that my children feel really close to me, and I feel really close to them. And then there are times where we're fine. We're just doing other things, and they're not really paying attention to me that much. And so I think, when I think of God's relationship with us, because sometimes, let me interrupt myself. Sometimes when I think of prayer, I will think, well, God already knows everything, right? He already knows what's going to happen. What difference does it make if I pray or not? So then I think of my kids, and I think, if I'm in the car with my kids, and we're planning on stopping somewhere to eat, if my kids are being stinky little brats, I'm not going to care where they want to eat. I'm going to eat where I want to eat, because that's my plan. But if my kids are being perfect little angels and sweet and funny and having a good time with me, I might think, let's hear what the kids want to do. And so even though I have a plan to take the family out to eat, I might adapt that plan and adjust that plan for my children and do things a little bit that fit a little bit more in with what they want. So sometimes I will know what they want, and I will ignore them because of how they're behaving. And then other times I will know what they want, and I will ignore them because I need to stick with the plan, and the plan is important. But then there's other times that I know that what they want, and I'll bend, and I'll adjust our plans for it. And so that helps me when I think about prayer and talking to God. If I'm in a good relationship with God, maybe I can expect a little bit more of what I request in my prayers. But I think that He is willing. I think He has His plan, and He's willing to make adjustments for us, for our requests. He knows the desires of our hearts, but He wants that relationship with us, and maybe He just wants us to ask before He gives it to us. And so then that's kind of how that helps me with prayer and how I look at prayer and helps me with my prayer life. But when I think about sharing my faith with others, I look back at this fatherly example, and we just moved into a new house. And Megan and I got to the house on moving day, and we met the neighbors across the street who have 7 daughters. The house we came from last, where we lived last, there was one other child in the neighborhood, not a lot of options for friends. But now we have, right across the street, kids, a bunch of kids that are within the same age of my kids. So we knew right off the bat, the kids are going to love this. They're going to love having friends next door. We were very excited for them. But I know my kids. I know that my daughters, the 2 oldest, are very outgoing. So when they first got to the house, I said, hey, why don't you go meet the neighbors next door? And what did they do? They walked over and started talking to the neighbors. Very comfortable. But I know that my sons are a little bit more like me. They're a little more timid, a little more shy, want to ease their way into things. And so I didn't put that pressure on them. I understood that they're going to be friends with these kids too, but they're not going to rush into it the way the girls would. And so when I think of them going and meeting someone new, it's going to take a little bit more time. And so when I think of some of us being able to sit down with a person and bring them to Jesus in a matter of 30 minutes, I don't know how that happens, but I guess it happens sometimes. I think God knows that person. God knows us better than I know my kids. So He knows what we're capable of. He knows that some of us in this room are capable of doing some amazing things that no one else is capable of. He knows that I am over here not really capable of a lot of that stuff, but maybe I can figure things out over time, that I'm going to ease my way into it. And so I think that God will be patient with us because of His relationship with us. And we can use that as motivation to be more relational with each other. So again, I want to go back to this idea of putting away the list of spiritual maturity, how we measure ourselves, and getting to, when it comes to prayer and sharing our faith, don't worry about being spiritual. Just be relational. And so I don't want to just say that because that's kind of, oversimplifying things. I want to give you an idea of what it can look like. And so when I was thinking about this week, I thought of one thing that has helped me, and I hope that it will continue to help me, that I want to encourage you to do. So one thing you can do in being relational with people, being relational with God, one thing you can do is when you see someone that you see often, like maybe there's a person in your neighborhood that takes walks frequently, so they pass your house a couple times a day or even a couple times a week. Or maybe you have the same mail carrier, consistent mail carrier, so that you see them a few times a week as they're dropping off the mail and you're going to pick it up. Or maybe you go to the same store and get the same person to check out your groceries for you. These people that some of us are very comfortable with just becoming, Barb's just going to become friends with everybody that she meets. I'm not Barb. So what I have to do is I have to look at these people and tell myself, I'm going to be friends with that person someday. And every time I see him, I'm just going to say, I'm going to be friends with that person someday. And as I'm saying that, as I'm noticing and observing these people in my life that aren't direct contacts, maybe it's somebody at work, maybe it's somebody at school, I'm going to be friends with them. And then I'm going to keep my relationship with God by just talking to him constantly. God, help me be friends with them. Help me to step into those situations that I tend to drag my feet on. Help me, give me a little bit of a push when the opportunity is right. And not to be weird, not to force myself, but to just start a conversation, get to know them, build a relationship with them. And so looking at people and saying, I'm going to be friends with that person, and then talking to God constantly, those are my suggestions for how we can get started with this. And then my third suggestion is, don't be weird. Don't be that person, and if you have, I'm sorry, don't be that person that walks up to a complete stranger that you've never talked to and said, God wants me to talk to you today. Even if you really feel that God wants you to talk to that person, even if that's true, don't say that first. Save that for later. Or walking up to that person that you've waved at in the neighborhood, but you haven't really had a real conversation with and saying, I've been praying for you. That's a wonderful thing that you've been praying for that person. And I want you to pray for people that you haven't met yet, but you want to. But don't lead with that. That'll mean so much more a year down the line when you've built a relationship and you can say, hey, by the way, even before we met, I was praying that we'd meet. That would be so cool. But if you start with that, that might be the end of the relationship. That might be where that person starts avoiding you. They take a different route in the neighborhood for their walk. Or they rush inside and put the garage door down as fast as they can to avoid that neighbor, the spiritual neighbor. So don't be weird. I'm going to end with a personal story, and I love this story because I've been in the church all my life. I've been training for ministry and been in ministry all my life, but this didn't happen in ministry, and so I just love this story. And it's a little bit of a personal brag, so bear with me. I don't like to brag about myself too much, but I'm just proud of this. So before we had children, we moved up to Jacksonville, Florida, and we were working with a church that couldn't pay us very well. So I was working a job at UPS from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. Tuesday through Saturday, and then working a job at Iron Mountain Record Center Specialist in this big warehouse on Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then I was also going to church on Wednesday night to teach, and Sunday morning to teach, and Sunday night to teach. And so it was not a very sustainable plan, but we didn't have kids yet, and we were trying to make ends meet, and it was a good time in my life because I was young, and it's like, okay, if I have to work hard to make ends meet, at least I'm not too much of a sissy to do that. I can handle that. But I'm working in Iron Mountain in this warehouse, and it's basically a place that holds, I don't even know if they do things the same way because this was 12 years ago, and so many things are more technological these days. But when I was there, it was a big warehouse with 3 stories of shelving that just had boxes of records and files. Most of them were medical files, so if a doctor was seeing a patient that week, they would call for their files, and we would get the order, and I'd run up to the third floor, go to the fourth aisle, pull out the top shelf, the fifth box, and find the file in there and bring it down, and they'd drive it to the doctor's office. So it was one of those jobs that was hard work, but it was better when you had a lot to do because it was such a long day. So if it was not a busy day, you were just kind of hanging out in a warehouse with 3 or 4 other guys and twiddling your thumbs, hoping that the time would go by faster. But if you had a lot to do, you could move quickly. And so I like to work really hard. Some of the guys there had been there a lot longer than me, so they were not as motivated as I was, but I was young and foolish and wanted to prove to everyone that I could do things well. So I worked really, really hard and got a lot of things done, had really good numbers. There was another guy that worked with me, and he found out that I was a Christian, and he was an atheist. His name was Harold. Harold was a funny guy, and he was funny in that sort of way that he really wants to annoy you and smile at you while he's annoying you and see what you're going to do, especially because I was a Christian. And so he would bring in his satellite radio and play like the worst rap songs with the worst language that he possibly could and just kind of stare at me to see what I would do. And he would, cuss and do all these things that he knew in his mind were not Christianly things to do. He would just behave in these ways. And there were other guys that they had mouths, whatever, that doesn't really matter. But I liked hanging out with Harold because he would try to push my buttons, and it helped me get through the day. And so I'm Facebook friends with Harold. We don't talk much, but as far as I can tell, he's still an atheist. He doesn't believe anything. But I only worked that job for a year. But after I worked that job, about probably 6 months to a year after I was done working there, I got a message on Facebook from another friend or another coworker, and his name was Hiram. And Hiram told me, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I became a Christian. And it was because I saw you and saw how you acted, and it really impressed me. And so I'm a Christian now. And that just tickled me to death because here I am, a young guy trying to make it in ministry, trying to be a youth minister, trying to have all those awkward, weird talks with all those high schoolers, trying to prove to myself that I'm as good as the youth ministers down the street. I've gone to Bible college, I'm doing my studying, I'm learning the Bible, I know all this stuff. And here I am, all of this focus is on the church. I want to be full-time, I want to work with the church, I want to help grow this church, I want to do amazing things with the church. And I'm just doing this job because I have to do this job to make ends meet. But here is where my most impactful ministry in Jacksonville happened in that year and a half that I was there, was just being normal, just being in relationship. I was not talkative, I was very quiet. This guy that became a Christian was quiet too. And so a lot of times we would just be interacting with each other without even saying anything. We'd be walking past each other, working together. And it was just being a normal human Christian that led someone to Jesus without me I didn't have to have that awkward conversation with him. I didn't have to sit Hiram down and say, hey, it's time for you to decide. I didn't have that with anybody. I didn't want to be the weird guy. But it happened because I was normal, and I wasn't normal like conforming and being like them. I was just being myself, and I wasn't trying to force Jesus down their throats like I think that a youth minister was supposed to do, that I thought a youth minister was supposed to do. And I wasn't being super churchy and inviting them to church. I was just being a good guy. And so that's an encouragement to me, even in the ministry, that sometimes we can accomplish a lot more just by being in a normal, natural relationship, being with people, being ourselves with people, being who you are, and maybe that little extra push of, I'm going to be friends with that person someday. But if we can just be ourselves, we're not all going to be Barb, we're not all going to be Ron, we're not all going to be able to do some of these amazing things, but God will use us. He will use us for His work. He will use us in our relationships. And if you're not weird about it, you're probably going to have a lot more fun doing it too.